The clinking of glasses and the soft chatter of family filled the brunch table, but her words cut through everything like a blade. My sister leaned back in her chair, a smirk curling at her lips, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." The laughter that followed wasn't from me. It was from cousins, uncles, even a few who pretended to choke back their giggles. My stomach dropped. My fork trembled in my hand. In that moment, the eggs on my plate turned cold, my appetite vanished, and all I could taste was the bitterness of humiliation. She had done this before, always making me the target, always painting me as the weak one, the outsider in my own family. But this time was different. The smirk wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. She wanted everyone to see me small. And worse, they let her. No one defended me. No one told her to stop. I felt stripped of dignity, sitting there while her words echoed in my ears. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table, to show them that I wasn't some pitiful charity case they could drag along for appearances. But instead, I swallowed my anger, forcing down the sting of tears. My silence was my armor. Because deep inside I promised myself, this wasn't the end. If pity was the only reason they kept me around, then soon enough they would learn just how strong the weak one could become. And when that day came, my sister's smirk would fade into something else entirely. Fear. Brunch had always been one of those forced family traditions that seemed cheerful from the outside but never quite felt warm to me. The restaurant was lively that Sunday, full of clinking cutlery and bursts of laughter from other tables, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sweetness of syrup and baked pastries. We sat at a long table near the window, sunlight pouring across the plates of eggs, fruit, and steaming pancakes. To anyone passing by, it must have looked like a picture-perfect gathering, a family bonded by love and habit. But I knew better. I had learned long ago that appearances mattered more to my sister and the rest of them than anything genuine. They liked to be seen together, as if closeness could be performed like a play, but underneath, I always felt like the unwanted character who hadn't been meant to make the cast list. My sister, Melissa, sat at the head of the table, as she often did. She didn't need to be asked. She claimed the spot naturally, like a queen on her throne, her presence commanding the attention of everyone within earshot. She was dressed perfectly for the occasion, her hair done in soft waves that framed her face, a gold necklace glinting at her collarbone. Even her laugh carried a certain charm, the kind that made people lean in and smile, even when nothing particularly funny had been said. She knew she was adored, and she thrived on it. Around her, cousins cracked jokes, our aunts nodded approvingly, and our uncles drank their coffee with the kind of reverence they reserved for only a few people in the family. She was everything I wasn't, bold, radiant, unshakable, and because of that she never let me forget my place. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my plate, cutting into the omelette with mechanical precision, nodding absently whenever someone addressed me. My younger cousin leaned over to ask about my job, and before I could even answer, Melissa interrupted smoothly, her voice dripping with casual dismissal. "She's still figuring things out," she said, giving me that sideways glance she always used when she wanted to box me into a corner. The table laughed politely, some even sympathetically, and I shrank back in my chair, feeling my face flush. I opened my mouth to correct her, to explain that no, I wasn't figuring things out, I actually had plans and progress. But by then, the conversation had moved on, swept away by Melissa's effortless control. It was always like this. My words never seemed to land, while hers stuck like gospel. The brunch stretched on, and though I smiled when expected, every interaction felt like a tiny jab. My aunt praised Melissa for organizing a fundraiser last week. My uncle toasted to her new promotion. Even my mother, who rarely spoke during these gatherings, leaned over to remind me how proud she was of both her girls, but her eyes lingered only on Melissa as she said it. Each moment reinforced what I had felt my entire life. I wasn't there because they wanted me. I was there because it would look bad if I wasn't. I told myself not to care. I tried to sip my coffee slowly, to let the warmth steady me, but I couldn't ignore the weight pressing down on my chest. Every bite I took seemed heavier than the last, every laugh around me sharper. I began counting the minutes until I could excuse myself and leave. Then it happened. Melissa leaned back in her chair, pushing her plate away with that satisfied grace she had when she knew all eyes were on her. She dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a napkin, then looked directly at me, her lips curving into that familiar smirk that always made me uneasy. Her voice was clear, pitched perfectly to cut through the chatter but not loud enough to seem cruel to anyone but me. "You know," she said, tilting her head as though she were delivering some deep observation, "you're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." For a second I didn't process it. The words seemed to float above the table, hanging in the air like smoke. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, the piece of omelette dangling as though time itself had stopped. Then the sound of stifled chuckles broke the stillness. My cousin snorted. My uncle shook his head, smiling into his coffee. Even one of my aunts let out a small, reluctant laugh, as though she didn't quite want to but couldn't resist joining the group. No one looked at me. No one told her to stop. The humiliation burned hot in my chest, spreading through me so quickly I thought I might actually burst into flames. My face flushed red, my hands trembled, and I had to put the fork down before I dropped it. I wanted to defend myself, to snap back with something sharp enough to cut her the way she cut me. A dozen retorts flashed in my mind, but none seemed strong enough. None seemed worthy of silencing her smirk. And deep down I knew the truth. If I did respond, they would only laugh harder. They would call me dramatic, too sensitive, unable to take a joke. So I stayed silent. I stared at my plate, the yellow of the eggs blurring as tears threatened to rise. I blinked quickly, forcing them back, refusing to let her or anyone else see me cry. My throat tightened until swallowing felt impossible, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. Silence became my shield, even as it suffocated me. Melissa leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Don't look so offended," she whispered, amusement dancing in her eyes. "I'm just being honest." She leaned back again, laughing lightly at some unrelated joke someone else had made, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just gutted me in front of the people I was supposed to call family. The rest of the brunch blurred together. Conversations swirled around me like meaningless noise. Plates clattered, waiters moved between tables, and sunlight shifted across the floor. I barely touched my food. Every now and then I caught Melissa's gaze, her smirk still plastered in place, victorious. And each time I lowered my eyes, not because I was beaten, but because I was planning. Somewhere beneath the humiliation, beneath the sting of betrayal, something inside me hardened. When the check came, I slipped away before anyone noticed, mumbling something about needing fresh air. Outside, the cool breeze hit my face, and I inhaled deeply, trying to steady the storm inside me. The laughter from the restaurant drifted through the glass, muffled but still sharp, and I felt the divide between us grow wider with every second. They could have her throne, her spotlight, her shallow victories. Let them laugh at me now. One day I promised myself it would be different. I walked away from that brunch with my heart heavy but my resolve stronger than it had ever been. Melissa thought she had won, that her smirk was the last word. But in truth, she had given me the beginning of something else entirely. The days after the brunch crawled by like a slow, relentless ache, the memory of Melissa's smirk replaying in my mind each time I closed my eyes. I would be at work staring at spreadsheets or answering emails, but her words, "You're lucky we even include you, pity goes a long way," echoed like an unwanted refrain in the back of my head, making even the most ordinary tasks feel unbearable. Nights were no easier. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing against me as I replayed the scene from every angle, wondering why I hadn't spoken up, why I hadn't defended myself. Each time, I rehearsed sharp comebacks that never came, witty retorts that might have wiped the smug smile from her face, but they always arrived too late, spoken into the dark rather than across that brunch table. And yet, the longer I sat with my silence, the more it began to feel less like weakness and more like a seed, something small buried deep but waiting to grow. Melissa thought she had silenced me, but what she had really done was wake me up. At work, I started to notice how much I had been fading into the background, not just in my family but in every space I occupied. I showed up on time, completed my tasks, and went home without drawing much attention. My boss rarely acknowledged me. My colleagues never asked for my input in meetings unless it was absolutely necessary, and I realized with a sick kind of clarity that I had allowed myself to blend into the wallpaper. Melissa had been cruel, yes, but she had also exposed something I had been afraid to admit. I had been living quietly, too quietly, waiting for others to notice my worth instead of claiming it myself. And if I didn't change something soon, I was going to vanish entirely. Not just in my family but everywhere. The shift didn't happen overnight. First, it was small things. I started waking up earlier, forcing myself to take a walk before work even when I didn't feel like it. The air was crisp in the mornings, the streets still half asleep, and with each step I felt the heaviness in my chest loosen just a little. I bought a new notebook and began writing down everything I wanted. Not what others expected of me, but what I wanted. Some of the goals were small, like learning how to cook one proper meal without messing it up, while others were larger, scarier, like finally applying for the team lead position at work that had been open for months. I had told myself before that I wasn't ready, that someone else was more qualified, but Melissa's words had made me realize something brutal. No one was ever going to hand me an invitation to belong. If I wanted a place, I would have to carve it out myself. Still, the family's shadow loomed over me. My phone buzzed constantly with the group chat. Pictures of Melissa's latest achievements, her new haircut, her recent shopping trip, comments from relatives showering her with admiration. I stayed silent most of the time, replying with the occasional nice or congrats, just to keep the peace. But one night, as I scrolled through another round of messages praising her, I felt the bitterness rise like bile in my throat. My finger hovered over the screen, ready to type something biting, something that would puncture the perfect image they all seemed so eager to maintain. But instead I put the phone down and went back to my notebook. Their validation wasn't mine to chase anymore. Then came the invitation to another family gathering, this time at my parents' house. My first instinct was to decline, to claim I was busy, but something in me refused. Avoiding them would only feed Melissa's narrative that I was weak, dependent on their pity. If I wanted to break free from that role, I had to face them, not hide. I spent the week leading up to it preparing, not rehearsing comebacks, but preparing myself to walk into that house with a spine as straight as steel. I bought a new outfit, nothing extravagant but something that made me feel strong, polished, unshakable. I practiced looking into the mirror, meeting my own eyes without flinching. It felt strange at first, unnatural, but by the time the weekend arrived, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Confidence. When I arrived at my parents' house, the familiar scent of home-cooked food wrapped around me, pulling me back into 1,000 childhood memories. But this time, I refused to shrink into the corners like I used to. I greeted everyone with steady warmth, hugged my mother, shook my uncle's hand firmly, and smiled at my cousins as though I had nothing to prove. Melissa, of course, was already there, dazzling in a new dress, her voice carrying over the chatter like music. The moment her eyes landed on me, I saw it, the quick flash of surprise, gone in an instant but real nonetheless. She hadn't expected me to show up. She hadn't expected me to look composed, radiant even. For once, she wasn't the only one commanding attention. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation, but unlike at brunch, I didn't let myself fade away. When someone asked about my work, I answered clearly, proudly, sharing my recent projects without apology. When Melissa tried to interrupt, I raised my voice slightly, not angrily but firmly, until she fell silent, her interruption cut clean. The room shifted. It was subtle, but I felt it. People were listening to me, not just to her. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow in the corner. I was part of the light. Of course, Melissa didn't take it well. She smiled too sweetly, her words edged with poison as she asked if I was finally finding my footing. I could feel the trap in her tone, the attempt to reduce me once again, but I refused to step into it. Instead, I smiled back, calm as ever, and said, "Yes, I am. And it feels good." My voice didn't waver, and in that moment, something shifted not just in me but in the room itself. My aunt nodded slowly. My cousin glanced at me with something like respect. My father even leaned in and asked me more about my plans at work. The balance of attention tipped, ever so slightly, away from Melissa. When I left that night, I didn't leave with humiliation clinging to me like I had at brunch. I left with something heavier but better, pride. Melissa hadn't been silenced completely, of course, but she had been unsettled. I could see it in the way she avoided meeting my gaze as I said goodbye, in the stiffness of her smile. For the first time in my life, I had stood tall beside her, and she had faltered. As I drove home, the streetlights flashing across my windshield, I realized this wasn't just about my sister anymore. It was about me. About refusing to be defined by pity or dismissal. About stepping into my own life with the kind of power I had always thought belonged only to people like her. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I felt ready to walk it. One step, one word, one unshakable choice at a time. In the weeks that followed the dinner at my parents' house, the small shift I had felt inside me began to grow into something undeniable, like a quiet flame catching wind and turning into a steady fire. At work, I stopped hesitating before speaking in meetings, forcing myself to raise my hand or simply voice my ideas before the moment passed. At first, my colleagues blinked in mild surprise, as though unused to hearing my voice. But soon they began nodding, writing notes, even building on my suggestions. My boss, a man who had once looked past me as though I were part of the office furniture, started calling on me directly, asking what I thought about projects and deadlines. When the team lead position reopened, no one had filled it the last time, the company claiming they didn't find the right fit. I didn't let my doubts win. I applied, and this time I didn't submit a timid letter that sounded like an apology for existing. I wrote with clarity, outlining my accomplishments, my plans, and my vision for the team. The day I hit send, I felt my heart hammer in my chest, but unlike before, it wasn't from fear. It was from possibility. Outside of work, I carried this same energy into the rest of my life. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, not because they had abandoned me but because I had hidden myself away in embarrassment for too long. We went out for coffee, for walks, for dinners where laughter came easily and without barbs. I realized how much joy I had been missing, how much I had isolated myself by measuring my worth against my sister's. Slowly, I started to rebuild pieces of a life that belonged only to me. But the family's grip was not so easily escaped, and Melissa, sensing the change in me, seemed determined to tighten hers. She began texting more often under the guise of checking in, but her messages always carried the same undertone. Subtle jabs, veiled comparisons. "Heard you spoke up at dinner," she wrote once, followed by a laughing emoji, as though my newfound confidence were a joke. Another time she asked if I was enjoying pretending to be the successful one, and warned that people notice when you try too hard. I read each message with a tightening in my chest, but I refused to reply with the anger she wanted. Instead, I sent back short, neutral answers, just enough to let her know she hadn't broken me, but never enough to give her fuel. Yet I knew it wouldn't stop there. Melissa thrived on control, and the more she felt it slipping, the harder she would fight to regain it. My prediction proved true at the next family gathering, which happened to be my cousin's birthday. The living room was packed with relatives, balloons tied to chairs, music buzzing in the background. I walked in wearing the same steady confidence I had practiced, greeting everyone warmly, no longer shrinking into corners. Melissa was already there, of course, dazzling in her effortless way, but this time I noticed something different. Her smile seemed tighter, her laugh a little forced, like she was trying to reclaim a stage that no longer belonged solely to her. When I spoke with my cousin about work, sharing the exciting news that I had been shortlisted for the team lead role, Melissa's ears perked up. She strolled over, arm draped casually across the back of the sofa, her voice syrupy sweet as she interrupted. "Oh, that's cute," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Didn't realize they were considering you. I mean, no offense, but don't they usually want someone with leadership experience?" For a moment, silence fell around us, all eyes turning to me. I felt the old humiliation prickling at the edges, threatening to drag me back into the role she had carved for me. But then I remembered the notebook in my drawer at home, the early mornings I had forced myself to walk, the courage it had taken to hit send on that application. I met her gaze evenly, my voice calm and clear as I said, "They want someone with ideas, with initiative, and that's exactly what I bring. My experience speaks for itself." I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. The steadiness in my tone was louder than any shout could have been. My cousin nodded approvingly, others murmured agreement, and Melissa's smirk faltered just slightly. For once, her jab hadn't landed. The conversation flowed on without her, leaving her on the outside, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Doubt. That moment planted itself in my mind like a marker, a sign that I was no longer the person she could toy with. After the party, I sat in my car for a long time, replaying the scene over and over, savoring the way my voice had not trembled, the way people had listened. For years I had believed Melissa's power was absolute, but now I understood. It had only ever existed because I let it. The more I withdrew, the more space she had to dominate. The more I stepped forward, the smaller her shadow became. In the weeks that followed, I poured even more energy into my growth. I attended workshops, volunteered for projects that scared me, pushed myself into uncomfortable places because I knew that was the only way to stretch. Each time I succeeded, even in small ways, I felt another chain snap, another layer of doubt fall away. But as my light grew, so did Melissa's desperation. She began making sharper comments at family dinners, her tone less playful and more pointed. "Don't get carried away," she warned one night, swirling her wine. "You've always been the quiet one, the one who keeps to herself. People don't just change overnight." I smiled, refusing to rise to the bait, but inside I understood exactly what she was doing. She was terrified. Terrified that the role she had built for me, the weak one, the pitted one, was crumbling, and with it, her power. And for the first time in my life, I didn't fear her fear. I welcomed it, because it meant I was winning. The night I received the email confirming that I had been chosen for the team lead position, I sat in my apartment staring at the glowing screen with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. For a moment I couldn't move. I just kept rereading the words, as if they might vanish if I blinked too quickly. "We are pleased to inform you. Congratulations on your new role." It didn't feel real at first. For so long I had been told, directly and indirectly, that I was the one who lagged behind, the one who couldn't measure up, the one who needed pity to justify her place at the table. And now, here it was, proof that I was more than their perception, more than Melissa's cutting remarks. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, instinctively thinking to share the news, but when I opened the family group chat, I hesitated. The thread was, as usual, filled with Melissa, pictures of her posing with colleagues, updates on her newest projects, relatives piling on heart emojis and praise. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I locked the phone and set it aside. Not this time. I didn't want my triumph to be swallowed by her dismissive comments or overshadowed by forced congratulations that would taste of salt more than sweetness. This victory was mine, and I wanted to savor it alone, at least for one night. I cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta tossed in olive oil and garlic, but it tasted better than any restaurant meal I had ever eaten, because every bite carried the flavor of independence. I poured a glass of cheap wine, toasted to myself, and for the first time in years, I laughed out loud in my empty apartment, the sound raw and free. But Melissa, of course, wasn't far from my thoughts. I knew the news would reach her eventually, whether I announced it or not. And I also knew she wouldn't take it lightly. For Melissa, life had always been a game of roles, with her as the star and me as the supporting character who made her shine brighter by contrast. My achievement threatened that balance, and I could almost predict the look on her face when she heard, the flash of disbelief, the tightening jaw, the inevitable smirk that masked her anger. The anticipation both terrified and thrilled me. The opportunity to confront her, not with words but with undeniable proof of my worth, was no longer a distant fantasy. It was here, looming closer with each day. The chance came sooner than I expected. My mother decided to host a dinner to celebrate Melissa's recent award at work. Yet another accolade added to her glittering collection. At first I thought about declining, but something inside me pushed back. Why should I hide? Why should I shrink just to make her more comfortable? So I agreed, and when the night came, I walked into my parents' house with my head high, my new confidence woven into every step. The dining room was warm with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread, the table set with care. Relatives buzzed with chatter, glasses clinked, and Melissa sat at the center as always, basking in the glow of attention. She looked radiant, her makeup flawless, her dress perfectly tailored, her laugh filling the room like music she had composed herself. But when she saw me enter, something flickered in her eyes, something sharp, calculating. "Well, look who's here," she said, rising to hug me, her arms stiff, her perfume overwhelming. "I wasn't sure you'd show." "Of course I'd show," I said smoothly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It's a celebration, isn't it?" She tilted her head, studying me, as if trying to decode what had changed. Dinner began, and as always, the conversation flowed toward Melissa, with everyone asking about her award, her work, her future plans. I listened quietly, not bitter, not jealous, just patient. I knew my moment would come, and when my father turned to me and asked, "And how's work for you these days?" I took a breath, steady and deliberate. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach every ear at the table, "I was promoted this week. Team lead." For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Then, almost in unison, voices erupted. Questions, congratulations, raised glasses. My aunt leaned forward with a smile. My cousin clapped me on the shoulder. Even my mother's eyes lit with surprise and pride. The spotlight for once shifted. And Melissa, she smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Team lead," she repeated, her voice sugar-coated. "Well, that's nice. Isn't it, everyone?" So proud of her for finally catching up. The words were laced with venom, but I was ready. I didn't let them sting. Instead, I held her gaze and smiled, calm as ever. "Not catching up," I said evenly. "Just moving forward." A ripple of murmur spread across the table, and Melissa's smirk faltered, the first crack in her polished armor. She quickly masked it, turning the conversation back to herself, but the damage was done. The balance had shifted, and she knew it. I felt it too, a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be included, to be tolerated. I belonged there, not because of their pity but because of my own strength. That night, as I left my parents' house, I saw Melissa standing by the window, watching me. Her expression was unreadable, but I sensed the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. And for once, I didn't fear it. Let her plot, let her smirk, let her try to pull me back into the shadows. I had built something she couldn't take from me, and I wasn't going back. The days after that dinner felt like standing at the edge of a storm, the air heavy with the promise of thunder, and though Melissa said nothing directly to me, I could sense her anger simmering beneath the polished mask she wore. The family buzzed with talk of my promotion, a quiet shift in the usual narrative that had always revolved around her, and while some relatives tried to balance their praise evenly, I knew the difference. It was the first time in my life they looked at me not as the background character but as someone who had achieved something undeniable. For Melissa, this was intolerable. She had built her throne on the idea that she was untouchable, and now a crack had appeared in the foundation. It didn't take long for her to make her move. One Saturday afternoon my mother called, her voice hesitant, almost apologetic, asking me to come to a small family lunch. I suspected immediately that Melissa had orchestrated it, and part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the inevitable confrontation, but something stronger inside refused. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me proving to myself as much as to everyone else that I no longer bowed to her smirk or her cruelty. So I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, the lunch was anything but small. Nearly everyone was there, the table crowded with dishes, the air buzzing with chatter. Melissa stood near the head of the table, her smile fixed in place, her eyes sharp as glass. The moment I walked in, she called out, "There she is, the star of the hour." Her voice was light, but the edges cut deep, and a few people chuckled nervously. I smiled back steady. "Hi everyone," I said, taking my seat without shrinking, without apologizing for existing. Lunch began, and as expected, Melissa dominated the conversation, telling stories about her work, her friends, her travels. But every so often, someone turned to me, asking about my new role, and I answered with quiet confidence, no longer rushing through my words. Melissa tried to cut in, to redirect attention, but this time it didn't work. The shift was subtle but clear. People were listening to me, and she felt it. Halfway through the meal, she struck. Setting down her glass with a deliberate clink, she leaned back and said, "You know, it's funny. Growing up, I always worried about you. You were so fragile. I never thought you'd be able to handle pressure, let alone lead a team. Honestly, I guess we all felt a little sorry for you." The room went silent, forks paused mid-air, eyes darting between us. It was the same tactic she had used at brunch, the same smirk on her lips, but this time I didn't flinch. I let the silence hang for a moment, feeling the weight of every eye on me, and then I set down my fork and looked straight at her. "Fragile," I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "Maybe once, but not anymore. You've spent years reminding me I wasn't enough, and I let you. I believed it. But you don't get to define me anymore. I've built something for myself, without your approval, without your pity. And the truth is, Melissa, it's not me who needs the family's pity. It's you." Gasps rippled around the table, and Melissa's smirk faltered, her cheeks flushing. She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued, my voice steady, rising just enough to fill the room. "Because for all your awards, for all your stories, you can't stand it when the spotlight isn't on you. You can't stand it when someone else succeeds. That's not strength, it's fear. And I won't be part of it anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. My heart hammered, but my hands didn't shake, and when I looked around, I saw something I had never seen before. Respect. My uncle nodded slowly. My cousin's eyes widened with something like admiration. Even my mother, usually silent in these moments, looked at me with pride glistening in her eyes. Melissa, for once, had no words. She sat there, her lips parted, her face stiff, her smirk finally gone. I didn't wait for her to recover. I stood, smoothing my napkin onto the table and said, "Thank you for lunch. It was lovely." Then I walked out, my steps steady, the air outside cool against my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was walking into my own life. In the weeks that followed, something shifted permanently. The family still praised Melissa, still adored her, but it wasn't the same. They looked at me differently now, not as an afterthought but as someone with her own place, her own light. Melissa avoided me in the group chat, her silence speaking louder than any insult she could have thrown. And as for me, I stopped waiting for their approval altogether. My work filled me with purpose, my friends surrounded me with laughter, and my own reflection finally felt like someone I was proud to see. I realized then that true victory wasn't about crushing Melissa, wasn't about making her small. It was about no longer letting her make me small. Her smirk had once been a weapon, but now it was nothing more than a memory, a ghost of the person I used to be. And as I moved forward, stronger and freer than ever, I knew that my story no longer began with her cruelty. It began with my choice to rise above it, to claim a life that was always mine to live. Sparkles, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more gripping stories of betrayal, drama, and unexpected twists.